Welcome to another installment on learning how to Cerakote. Today we're going to be looking at Battleworn finishes. Unlike my first video, I'm not going to call this a complete beginner's guide. One, because my first video is a prerequisite for the information that we're going to share here. You have to know how to Cerakote a solid finish before you do a Battleworn finish, and we're not going to go over everything all over again. But I'm also hesitant to call this a complete beginner's guide because we're going to go deeper into the subject of Battleworn finishes than I have seen anybody else go on YouTube. So buckle up, we're going for a ride. Before we get too far though, I do want to give a big shout out to our video sponsor today, Paasche Airbrushes. And if you like companies that still build stuff in the US of A, give them a look. Okay, we are going to be applying the Battleworn finish to this 80% builder set that a buddy of mine handed off to me. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about philosophy. What is a Battleworn finish? Well, it's an attempt to make what is otherwise a new gun, or at least a new finish on a gun, look like it's old and been through battle. Okay, well, when I was first doing a Battleworn finish, I did a bunch of research on the internet, and I found some versions I like, some I don't. We'll talk about those in a minute. But I also found another industry that essentially does Battleworn, and they take it to a much more obsessive degree than the gun crowd does, and that's the guitar folks. They have a process that they do called relicking, and they will make the hardware look old, the finish look old. But the key that I took away from this research was that the difference between a bad relicking job and a good relicking job is how realistic the relicking looks. So they're paying attention to where things would naturally wear, where the human hand would touch more on an item versus other areas where it would touch less. They're actually using a realistic approach to aging to make the item seem more authentic when it's done. Okay, so how do we apply that to a Battleworn finish on, say, this builder set? Well, let's talk about the two main styles that I see out there, and then we'll also discuss the third style, which is my own take on things, and that's what we're going to be learning today. The first style looks like this. I'm about to throw out some terms. If you don't understand them, watch through the video, come back and watch this again in a minute. But this style is done by laying down a base coat, tacking that out in the oven, laying down a black coat, tacking that out in the oven, and then using an abrasive like a Scotch-Brite pad to pull some of that black back off of the firearm to show through the original color. Trigger warning, I hate this style. I don't think it's realistic at all. I have never seen a gun, no matter how grimy it's gotten, have that much grime, represented by the black that we saw, left on the surface of the weapon. Moreover, where you do have grimy guns and whatnot, there aren't big scratch marks on them in a consistent direction, which is what that abrasive pad ends up leaving. You have these straight line streak marks that just don't mimic anything in reality. So we're not going to learn how to do that one. The second style you see out in the world is very similar, but much more elegant. It looks like this. This is where you lay down a base coat, tack it out, you lay down a black coat, and almost tack it out. You get it to the point where it's almost dry in the oven, but when you touch it, it still has a little tack sound and feeling when you touch it. We're gonna pull it out then and use acetone-soaked rags to wipe off a bunch of that black and show through to our original color. I like this version a lot better because it only really leaves the black where your rag doesn't hit effectively, which is corners, nooks, crannies, places that you would expect someone that's cleaning their rifle not to be able to get every bit of dirt and grime out of, because those are the hard to reach places. It's realistic. Secondly, if you do the wiping effectively and you use clean rags, which we'll talk about during the process, you can get to a point where there's almost no streaking, no lines left. Again, I don't find that realistic, so we're going to avoid that look like the plague. We're going to try and get a nice, clean see-through to our base coat and leave the darkness and the grime in only the places that we want it. Okay, now let's talk about the third method, which is what I do. It is a slight variation on that second method that I came up with, and it only got really one extra step. We are going to pull Cerakote off of the weapon after we put down our base coat. And the reason for this is, if you look at a gun, it's got high spots and low spots. If a weapon has seen extreme use, such as in battle, you would have expected it to fall, get knocked. Look at your everyday carry weapon. There are spots on that weapon that constantly rub up against your body, your holster, your shirt. And those spots, even if your gun is Cerakoted, they'll have worn through on the highs where it touches those items. That's because it's constantly being abraded by your movement, by touching other things. So that extra step we're going to do is going to be to pull our base color off a couple high spots, especially high spots where we would expect high wear in sort of a battle situation. It's going to look like this. Now, there's actually two ways to do this. What we're going to be doing today is we're just going to pull that base coat finish off to show the raw aluminum. Another way that you could do this, and I find this to be the way that I prefer to do it if I've also got like a stencil that I'm going to use and show through to my base color, is I'll actually spray my base color as like a very metallic look. So maybe like a battleship gray or tungsten, etc. And that way, when I put my color coat on top of that, I'm actually just pulling the color coat away and showing that metallic color. But like I said, today we're going to actually pull it back and show through to raw aluminum. But just keep in mind that there are two ways to do that if you desire. What we've got here is our parts with the base coat sprayed. I've let it air dry for 15-20 minutes, and I'm about to throw it in the oven. But this is a metal part, so you'd think, oh, he's going to throw it in at 250 degrees. Not this time. Because I am putting on a second color on top, this is where we're going to tackle that concept called tacking out. The goal here being to get this base coat to the point that you can touch it and not leave a mark, but no further. The further you get from that point where you kind of cross over from leaving a mark to not leaving a mark, the more you risk your next color not sticking. So you want to just get to the point it's tacked out and stop. So the way we're going to do that is we are going to throw it into our oven at our 150 to 180 sort of range, and we are going to check it every couple of minutes, and we are going to touch a spot where we don't care if we leave a mark, and we're going to look to see if it leaves a mark. We're going to do that until it doesn't, and we're going to pull everything out. It is worth noting, though, that different parts and different materials will actually tack out at different rates. So in general, you're going to have to kind of keep a log of how long it takes certain things to tack out. And that's not just plastic versus metal. It'll be aluminum versus steel, and it will also be different thicknesses of metal. So for instance, this upper will probably tack out at a different rate than that 80% lower, because an 80% is not milled out. There's a lot of solid aluminum in there that's got to heat up in that oven before it gets to temp. But let's go throw them in. We're at about 8 minutes, which polymer in my oven usually takes about 9 minutes, so we're going to do a check. I'm going to open the doors really quickly because I don't want to let a lot of heat out, but you'll notice that I usually have a clamp on this door to keep it really nice and shut. The metal stuff's over here because polymer's always going to tack out first. So whereas the polymer might take like 9 minutes, my metal is going to take 12, 15 minutes generally in this oven, and it will also change again based on the metal and also how much other stuff I have in it at the same time. But even if the polymer is tacked out, we are going to check the metal just so you can see what it looks like. I can still hear tack. Throw it in for another minute. And while we're waiting, we'll definitely be able to get some tack on this. Yeah. And I'm hoping you can see this, but it actually left a mark. You can see that fingerprint where it touched. Let's give this another test. Okay. Yeah. I could use just another little tiny bit. But I almost forgot. I'm supposed to be doing something else to the metal parts before they tack out. So I'm going to pull them out real quick. And we're going to do a little tiny thing that I said we were going to do. And I almost totally forgot before it was too late. So let's pull these out. That was a close call. I almost did not catch this in time. This is usually a step that I do while the paint is still wet. So it's air dried, but I haven't put it in the oven yet at all. Thankfully, it is something that you can get away with doing right up until it's tacked out. So I caught it just in time. That was almost bad. Either way, we're going to take a acetone soaked Q-tip and we're just going to go over areas that we want to pull paint off. So you'll see it's pulling off in the high spots. I'm going to do a little work, and we're only going to do this on the metal. And obviously I had to fully remove the anodizing on this to be able to get bare metal color. So that was a pain, but worth it. You'll see in a little bit. Word of advice, don't make that mistake. It was much harder to pull off than it usually is. But you can see we've pulled off color from here, high spots, edge of mag well, fire and safe, kind of all over that T in a couple places, and then similar sort of pull-offs on here. So top of this, edge of the Picatinny, where you'd expect to get hits around here. So we'll throw that back in and make sure it's fully tacked out. All right, so somewhere around 9 minutes, this was tacked out like usual. Now that we're fully tacked out, let's talk about what our next steps are. We are going to mix up some black, and we are going to set our fan to be a very light misting. We are just trying to almost cover the color, but we don't want to go on too thick, nor do we want to go on kind of everywhere, for lack of a better term, because we're going to pull most of it back off. So the more we put on, the more work we're making for ourselves later. So once this is all cooled down, I'll show you what spraying the black coat looks like. We're about 5 minutes. Let's take a look at what we have. Oh yeah, that's perfect to pull out. Yeah, you can hear that tack. All right, let's start pulling the black off. So we're gonna take a nice rag and soak it down with acetone, get it nice and wet, and then don't hold back. We're really gonna go at it. And the way you reduce that streaking is to switch up the section of the rag so that you don't use the section again that had paint on it. So I like to keep a whole bunch of small cut up sections of rag. And you'll also go over those sections multiple times. You can see how we're getting rid of that streaking, but it is staying down in those nooks and crannies. So as you can see, it's sort of impossible not to get some streaking at the beginning. So I'll focus on removing the bulk of the black, and then I'll come back in and do a more focused effort to remove streaking. Like so. There you go, that's a good example. Sort of leaving it just in nooks and crannies. We've got our exposed metal. Nice. Yeah, that looks super nice. Let me get rid of a little bit here. I'm inclined to leave a little bit more black on this because I find it plausible that a handguard with lots of nooks and crannies would stay dirtier than another part of a gun. We are going to throw everything back in for a couple of minutes just to make sure that that black is now fully tacked out. Then I'll actually pull out anything plastic. I'll run the metal at the standard 250 for 2 hours. I'll pull that, and then I'll run my plastic at 150 for 2 hours. But it's important to tack everybody out at the same temperature, simply because temperature that you do the initial cure for a coat with will actually affect the sheen, similar to your mix ratios and how that will. So always tack everything out together. And there we go, the result. I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with this. The wear pattern turned out nice. I actually really like how this handguard took the wear. Almost reminds me of that movie like Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. Very kind of almost Art Deco, but aged. Kind of cool. I like that. Pulled a lot off areas like this, so it gives it that nice aged look, with both the highs being impacted and the lows being impacted with the dirt look. Yeah, that looks good. I'm a fan. The other thing I will note is, I'm sure some of y'all watching me when I was pulling off the high spots and that acetone was almost changing the sheen of the areas where it was touching. You're probably going to yourself, ooh, that's not going to look good in the end. As you can see, that made zero impact when things were done. So what matters is what the Cerakote looks like after it's done curing. That's what matters. In my opinion, Battleworn is probably the easiest multicolor finish that you can get into, and that's why I really tackled this one first. But yeah, give it a go. It's really not that hard, and the results are very often just absolutely fantastic.